Venezuela's Attorney General has denounced that criminal Colombian organizations are facilitating the entry of Venezuelan nationals into the country through irregular border crossings. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro announced that he has tested positive for COVID-19 after experiencing mild symptoms. The UN Refugee Agency has noted the efforts of the Ugandan government to host refugees fleeing violence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. Venezuela's Attorney General Tarek William Saab denounced that criminal Colombian organizations are facilitating the entry of Venezuelan nationals into the country through irregular border crossings in the state of Táchira in order to evade the health control mechanisms established to prevent the spread of the novel coronavirus.
We have been able to establish that within the framework of the control measures established to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, organized crime groups in Colombia have dedicated themselves to receiving compatriots coming from South American countries such as Colombia, Peru, Chile, Ecuador, and Bolivia, with the aim of bringing them into Venezuelan territory through irregular routes, and in this way evading the entry protocols such as the COVID-19 tests, registration and control of entry before immigration, and the mandatory quarantine to be undertaken by reason of Presidential Decree number 4230, signed by the head of state, Nicolás Maduro Moros.
And the Attorney General also explained the mechanisms used by these criminal organizations to bring Venezuelan citizens residing abroad into the country illegally.
These gangs attract compatriots in Colombia and then guide them through the trails. These criminals are known as trocheros, who head to Venezuela, and once in the state of Táchira, they are taken to their final destination in motor vehicles with taxi drivers who are members of the same criminal network, in exchange for the payment of sums of money in foreign currency. This practice has generated a very serious situation from the point of view of the protection of our sovereignty and puts collective health at risk in the face of the serious COVID-19 pandemic.
Ecuadorian Vice President Otto Sonel Hosner tendered his resignation this Tuesday. Sonel Hosner had been in office since 2018. His resignation comes 7 months before the next presidential elections in the South American country. The official was President Lenin Moreno's third vice president and replaced Maria Alejandra Vicuña, who resigned in the midst of a corruption scandal after serving for 11 months during 2018. Vicuña took office after Jorge Glass, who had won the presidential race alongside Moreno and was sentenced to 6 years in prison after being found guilty of illicit association in the Odebrecht case.
From finding funds to finance important works of drinking water and basic infrastructure in dozens of cities in the country and boosting renewable energy projects, till helping a mother whose human development fund has been taken away, some have tried to undermine those efforts by calling them political campaigns. It is evident that they only move across our country and pretend to listen to people only when they want their votes. That is why they misjudge like that. If they want to call campaign to solving people's problems, do it. For me, it is an honor to work hard and serve with humility. I have always worked out of conviction and based on my principles, not by doing the math and polls for which I do not have the money. The only math I have always done is to add actions to multiply results.
Argentina has presented its debt restructuring offer to creditors who will have until August 4th to accept the proposal. According to the Argentinian government, this is its last offer to renegotiate the more than $66 billion owed. More details from Argentina with our correspondent Juan Carlos Bartolota.
Improved to avoid default, Economy Minister Martín Guzmán, together with President Alberto Fernández, finalized the proposal that was presented this Monday to the National Securities Commission of the United States and the creditors. It reaches $53.5 for every $100 contracted in debt bonds, and in principle mark a favorable response from the markets.
What it marks is an effort and a very clear intention on the part of the government to avoid any kind of possibility of disorderly default and to put the issue of the debt in Argentina in order and to raise it in the framework of a voluntary restructuring. Nothing is closed. It is true that this is what we are seeing today in the stock market, with the price of the shares, the price of the bonds that are rising very strongly. It is true that it has a lot of support if it is known that one of the main groups of bondholders publicly declared to accept the proposal. The doubt is with another group that is headed by BlackRock.
With the rise of the stock market up to 7.4%, and with the shares of Argentine companies abroad reaching an average of up to 22%, it is a very special day for the directors of the Argentine Industrial Union who support the government's initiative.
This will mainly improve, not only in the medium and long term, but in the short term, the financing to those companies that have to provide themselves with inputs from abroad. Do not forget that 2/3 of the inputs needed by the Argentine production are from abroad, and obviously this will improve the financial matter. Beyond that, I think it is healthy for the economy of the country for the medium and long term as well.
It is already known that with the support of the IMF and the G20, the Argentine proposal should be on the right track and clear up doubts about the economic future of the country and the consequences in a globalized economy. But for that, it remains for the BlackRock group to define its position and thus know if the government manages to avoid the default, so the open end could be extended until 5 p.m. next August 4th.
Juan Carlos Bartolota, Telesur, Buenos Aires.
And our correspondent in Havana, Laura Palmero, brings us a roundup of news from the Caribbean region.
Thanks for the contact. These are the most recent stories and news from Caribbean countries. Cuba government has denounced in the United Nations that after 2 months of the terrorist attacks against its embassy in Washington, D.C., the government of Donald Trump hasn't denounced the terrorist nature of it. An individual with a semi-automatic assault rifle attacked Cuba's diplomatic legation in Washington in April, and this serious terrorist attack endangered the lives and safety of the staff of the Cuban embassy and their families. Meanwhile, the U.S. government refrains from taking actions against terrorist people and groups settled in its territory, which instigate violence against Cuba and its institutions. It is important to highlight that the law enforcement agencies of the United States government are fully aware of it. The Trinidad and Tobago government has announced that it has no rush in opening the airports that were closed since March this year. Opposition parties have been calling on Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley to indicate whether or not the borders will remain closed ahead of August 10 general elections. Authorities informed that the government is not trying to disfranchise anyone who is overseas that wants to return to the country to vote in the election. So far this year, Anguilla, St. Kitts and Nevis, Guyana, and Suriname have held elections during the COVID-19 pandemic, with none of them reopening their borders to allow the nationals wanting to participate in the process. In Barbados, one passenger on board the repatriation flight from the United States tested positive for COVID-19 on arrival at the Grantley Adams International Airport. The JetBlue flight brought 115 passengers who were all tested on arrival. The American woman who is a resident in Barbados was the sole positive test and was immediately transferred to the isolation facility at Harrison Point. Before this latest case, the island's last confirmed COVID-19 case at patient was diagnosed on June 14. 10 days later, everyone in isolation was declared recovered and released. Barbados has now recorded 98 cases of COVID-19, with 90 recoveries and 7 deaths. The laboratory has completed 8,251 tests. And these are the most recent stories and news from Caribbean countries. Let's go back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Laura, and we're taking a very short break now, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, who has consistently downplayed the risks of the coronavirus, announced that he tested positive for COVID-19 after experiencing mild symptoms.
Everyone knew that it would sooner or later reach a considerable part of the population, as there are many people. If I, for example, hadn't taken the test, I wouldn't know the result, and it just came back positive. It was positive. It started Sunday with a certain indisposition and worsened on Monday, with discomfort, fatigue, a little muscle pain, and a fever reached 38 degrees.
And we continue in Brazil, where the public ministry requested this Monday that Environment Minister Ricardo Salles be removed from the post for violating his duty to protect the environment. According to the accusations, the minister advised President Jair Bolsonaro to take advantage of COVID-19 to bypass and change regulations on heritage, agriculture and the environment. The Brazilian Public Prosecutor's Office filed a lawsuit against Salles for disregarding the policies of his ministry to favour foreign interests. According to the 12 prosecutors who signed the lawsuit, Salles took part in a series of actions and initiatives characterized as intentional with the purpose of weakening state protection of the environment. During a press conference, the Director General of the World Health Organization stressed that the novel coronavirus pandemic shows no sign of slowing.
It took 12 weeks for the world to reach 400,000 cases of COVID. Over the weekend, there were more than 400,000 cases across the globe. There have now been 11.4 million cases of COVID-19 and more than 535,000 lives have been lost. The outbreak is accelerating, and we have clearly not reached the peak of the pandemic.
This Tuesday, a senior administration official confirmed that the White House has officially withdrawn the United States from the World Health Organization. The US withdrawal is effective as of Monday and has been submitted to the United Nations Secretary General. Trump initially announced his intention to withdraw from the WHO in May and has consistently accused the organization of aiding China in covering up the origins of the novel coronavirus. Senator Robert Menendez, ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, tweeted that Trump's response to the COVID-19 pandemic has been chaotic and incoherent, and withdrawing from the WHO amidst the pandemic is just another example. The senator further stated that this decision will not protect US lives or interests. And the director of the US National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Anthony Fauci, has warned of the increasing number of COVID-19 cases in the country. Fauci issued the warning during an interview with local media on Monday after the spike in infections across the United States. The US has recently reported over 50,000 new cases per day. The doctor blamed the situation on the reopening of commercial activities in different states, a measure that was promoted by President Donald Trump. Fauci described the reopening as premature. According to official figures, the US has seen more than 3 million coronavirus cases, while the death toll has surpassed 133,000. On Tuesday, a hospital in Rome successfully separated 2-year-old twins joined above the nape of their necks after 3 risky operations. The 2 sisters from the Central African Republic were brought to Italy in September 2018 after the director of the Baby Jesus Children's Hospital in the Vatican met the conjoined twins and their mother at the medical center where they were born. The pediatric hospital's doctors said that the case was one of the rarest and most complex forms of cranial and cerebral fusion. Health personnel stated that this was the first time in Italy, and likely the world, that surgeons were able to separate twins joined in such a way, as no such case has ever been cited in medical literature. Nearly 11 million Chinese students are taking their college entrance exam after the delay sparked by the coronavirus. Hopeful young candidates in Beijing are undertaking China's annual nationwide college entrance examination. The notoriously competitive test was postponed for a month this year due to the coronavirus pandemic. Following guidelines from the Education Ministry, nearly 11 million students around the country are required to track their health status prior to taking the test, and students from moderate to high-risk regions should wear masks when undertaking the examination. We have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. From the south. The The UN Refugee Agency has noted the efforts of the Ugandan government to host refugees coming from the Democratic Republic of the Congo after authorities allowed a temporary opening of 2 border points, leading to the entrance of over 3,000 refugees fleeing clashes between different militias.
The new arrivals were previously part of a larger group of approximately 45,000 people, according to local DRC authorities, who had attempted to flee towards the Ugandan border shortly after deadly clashes erupted between armed militia groups in Ituri province on 17th and 18th of May. Some of the refugees shared heart-wrenching accounts of militia attacks on their villages to our staff. Many of them told us they were separated from their families and had little time to pack any belongings or look for family members before fleeing. Very few were able to carry personal items, and most fled barefoot with only the clothes they were wearing. UNHCR welcomes the decision of the government of Uganda to allow the group of refugees to enter the country and receive life-saving aid and protection. This effort demonstrates how, through quarantines, health screenings and other measures, states can uphold their obligations under international law during the pandemic, while at the same time limiting potential transmission of the virus.
The Turkish Coast Guard announced it had intercepted a tanker carrying nearly 300 migrants on their way to Greece, adding that 8 suspected people smugglers had been arrested. During the operation, which took place Monday evening in the western region of Izmir, 276 migrants and 8 men suspected of organising the trip were arrested, according to a Coast Guard statement. The migrants, including 59 children and 46 women, came from Afghanistan, Syria, Bangladesh and Iran. The ship on which they were travelling was intercepted just before they set sail. Turkey, which hosts nearly 4 million Syrian refugees, is one of the main routes used by migrants trying to reach Europe from the Middle East, Asia and Africa. And almost 200 migrants rescued by a humanitarian rescue ship in the Mediterranean Sea were allowed to disembark in Sicily after 9 days stuck at sea. After being rescued in 4 separate operations on June 25th and 30th, the migrants aboard the ship became increasingly agitated, according to SOS Mediterranee, the NGO that runs the Ocean Viking rescue ship. However, approval to dock did not come until Sunday, after the NGO declared a state of emergency on board, adding it could no longer guarantee the safety of the migrants or the crew. The migrants will now have to wait out a 2-week quarantine period before being moved. On Tuesday, Dubai closed its only field hospital, set up at a convention centre to treat COVID-19 cases after the last patient, a Japanese national, walked out in good health. Doctors and nurses still wearing protective gear lined up, clapping for Hiroaki Fujita as he left the Dubai World Trade Center, which was transformed into a 3,000-bed field hospital in April in order to treat COVID-19 patients. The number of cases in the United Arab Emirates has dropped sharply from a peak of 900 a day in May. The Gulf state has so far reported over 50,000 cases and about 300 deaths.
Today, on the July 7th, we witnessed the discharge of the last COVID-19 patient from the Dubai Field Hospital. So now we will close the field hospital, which has continued with us since the 14th of April in treating COVID-19 patients with a clinical capacity of 3,000 beds and a capacity of 1,800 beds for intensive care. But thanks God, we did not use all of these beds. We only used 1,290 beds. Thanks to the efforts of the government and the efforts of the medical staff behind me, we have been able to put the pandemic under control.
I ask everyone to take a more safer way and keep your health.
Iran has recorded its highest number of COVID-19 fatalities within a 24-hour period, according to the Health Ministry on Tuesday. The 200 deaths reported on Tuesday exceed the previous record from Sunday, when the ministry registered 163 fatalities in a day. The number of new daily cases and deaths has increased sharply in the past week, following the gradual lifting of restrictions that began in mid-April. President Hassan Rouhani announced new measures on Saturday to try to curb the renewed spread of the virus. The Central African Republic is struggling with the impact of the coronavirus on its economy. The country now has more than 4,000 confirmed COVID-19 cases and has seen 52 deaths, according to recent figures compiled by Johns Hopkins University. Meanwhile, locals in the capital, Bangui, are complaining about a hike in food prices. Much of the landlocked nation's basic supplies come by road from neighbouring states, but lawlessness in the countryside has long been a problem, with armed groups frequently attacking transporters. Customs officials say they have seen a sharp drop in the arrivals of truck convoys, partly due to COVID-19 testing causing delays at borders. South Africa's confirmed COVID-19 cases have reached the 200,000 mark. 2/3 of the reported cases are located in the province of Gauteng, which is quickly becoming the new epicenter of the country's outbreak, as well as the province of Western Cape. Authorities have warned of a surge in cases over the past few weeks, with some senior officials indicating that stronger lockdown restrictions could be imposed. The Western Cape province remains the nationwide hotspot, comprising 34.5% of the national tally of cases, according to the health minister. The United Nations has warned that at least 3.5 million people are projected to fall into crisis or emergency food insecurity in Somalia between June and September. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said around 1 million more children are projected to be malnourished. In its latest humanitarian report, the agency stated that over 2.6 million people remain displaced and nearly 1 million school children out of class due to the COVID-19 related closure of schools. The UN agency said that since March 16th, the COVID-19 tally surged to nearly 3,000 in Somalia, aggravating pre-existing vulnerabilities, disrupting socio-economic gains and affecting livelihoods. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.
Follow our latest updates concerning the